Hello, I'm Jason Sims. I'm the administrative lead for the British Society of Animal Science, and I have with me David Wilde and Helen Warren, the trustees of the BSAS. And both of these people are at the very well embedded in the animal feed production. So, Helen, may I ask, how has the COVID-19 impacted on the industry, the animal feed industry?
I suppose the primary impact is the supply chain, basically. So obtaining raw materials with various kind of industries that supply raw materials into the feed industry, getting impacted by the coronavirus, particularly in terms of skeleton staffing, things like that. So production's gone down, lead times are getting bigger. We have seen some customers stockpiling or attempting to stockpile. So I suppose maybe it's the feed industry equivalent of the toilet roll fiasco. But some customers are trying to do that. I think, again, it's managing the situation. So you're running a skeleton staff, and also the impact of the protection of those staff as well. So hygiene, increased hygiene restrictions, PPE, just a different way of working, really. So in terms of impact overall, it's not been as large in the feed industry as it has been in some other industries and areas. But I would say the sort of, securing supply chains and raw material supply and skeleton staffing has been the issue.
David?
And I think just to add to that, obviously we're fortunate in a way that we can keep working as part of the global food supply network. But as Helen says, there have been some challenges, and obviously guys and the people in the factories working flat out to maintain the supplies onto farms. But a lot of it now working from home, people not going onto farms to visit as they would do normally. And I think there's been quite a challenge with obviously setting up virtual networking, and especially as many of us live in the remote areas of the country where the broadband isn't quite so good. So quite often the video conferencing goes down. So it's been a challenge, but we're working, and I think fair play to everybody involved from the farm right the way through to supplying to the supermarkets. We're seeing the responses and keeping the food on the shelves.
Yeah, and you're referring there to the access to farms. There's a lot of experiments still going on. So how has the relationship been between the science end of the animal science sector and relating to production?
I mean, in general, certainly from our perspective, there's no negative effect of the coronavirus in terms of the relationship between academia and industry. The biggest issue we've had is that obviously the majority of studies and trials have been cancelled, either midway through or trials that won't go ahead. So that has a big impact on things like PhD students, MSc, BSc studies. So that's an impact on the academic side, but it's also an impact on the industry side, because a lot of those studies, a lot of those PhDs and projects are industry funded. So we've come to the point where trials are on hold midway. We have a loss of potential data, some of which may or may not have been paid for. So then we're into discussions of, well, how do we rerun the experiment next year because it's been paid for? So there's a lot of dialogue between the industry and the academia at the minute in terms of experiments and running trials and research. But I don't think it's not a negative discussion at all. We're all in this together. This is the situation. How best can we handle it? And that really changes depending on an individual basis. So obviously the universities are running skeleton staff again. Some are not allowed on site. So we work with the university where no one other than essential animal keepers are allowed on site. So not even laboratory work can go ahead. Mm-hmm. Whereas others, they're allowed skeleton staffing in laboratories. So it really depends on the individual situation. So we do it on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's this opportunity now preparing for the future as and when things get back to whatever the new normal is going to be, to sort of prepare either rerunning previous trials that have had to be cancelled or new ones that we're looking to do. At least we can get all the paperwork sorted out beforehand and be ready to run the second we're allowed to. And we sort of get back into the laboratories or back onto the farm. So yeah, it obviously brings its challenges, but also opportunities and more dialogue, I think, with academia probably than we've had before.
I'm not sure really. I'm not sure really lessons learned. I mean, in terms of the feed industry, yes, looking at alternative supply routes and possibly tightening up on securing supply chain and securing supply of raw material. But a lot of that is out of the hands of the feed industry, because it's down to, you know, trade deals, regulations, politics, etc. So there's a limited amount we can do, but yes, certainly in terms of securing supply of raw materials and overall supply chain, then that's something that I think is likely to be tightened up, and just to have a kind of fallback if we have to have this situation again.
Mm-hmm. I think, yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, every company, every business is trying to be as efficient as possible, be it a poultry farm or a feed mill. So it's just re-looking at those efficiencies, and as well as the supply chains, it's the relationships we all have both with our customers and with the suppliers to ensure that you know, if there are any disruptions, that they can be managed as smoothly as possible and in a timely fashion.
And looking perhaps a little further ahead, post-COVID, do you see that the landscape is going to revert back to where it was before, or do you see it as being a very different situation?
I think it's mainly going to go back to what it was before. It's a relatively simple industry in terms of we buy the raw materials in, we turn them into feed and we sell them. There's not really much you can expand on or change. I think it is, just as we've said, it's maybe thinking about how we can better secure procurement of raw materials and secure that supply chain, whether that's looking closer to home, maybe reducing reliance on imported products. That's possibly one of the routes. Well, I mean, we're sort of going down that route anyway on the environmental side of things, but certainly Corona or COVID-19 may just kind of reinforce that we need to look more closely at home to get homegrown raw materials. But again, as David said, there's going to be, you know, probably better dialogue with customers and with suppliers as well. So I think going forward, there's not going to be a massive change, but certainly tightening up in security in terms of supply chain and raw materials.
Absolutely. I think, you know, from a business perspective, we've all had to get used to video conferencing and such like, maybe where we've tried to avoid them in the past. So again, looking forward, I think changes in any business is more opportunity, especially those companies that are global, to be doing more sort of training and customer conferencing rather than jumping on a plane and spending a week in a country. So, you know, this forced changed way of working is probably going to bring a lot of benefits in the future that way as well.
Excellent. Well, I really appreciate you both sharing your expertise and insight on that. And we wish you all the best and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.